Good morning, Bob.
Good morning, Jack.
So today we're going to talk about ethical lapses and corruption in the second Trump administration. There's been a lot of writing about this on the news side and the opinion side. We, and especially you, have been writing about this since January. So it's a good thing for us to analyze and discuss, I think. I propose that we start off with you telling us what corruption is, just to get it out there, and what the kind of legal architecture of corruption is in the Trump administration. Then we'll talk about instances of corruption and go a little bit bigger picture and figure out what's going on here. So maybe you could start off by telling us what we mean by corruption in this context and what the legal architecture of it is in the Trump administration.
Certainly. Corruption in the first instance, refers generally to the conduct of the government for purposes other than the ones for which officials are elected or appointed. That is to say, rather than the public interest or consideration of policy on their merits dictating their action, they are concerned with their own personal welfare. They may be enriching themselves or members of their family, but they're driving government policy for self-interested reasons and not for the broad public welfare.
And what is the relationship between corruption so understood and ethical lapses? Are they the same thing? Are they related?
They're definitely related. An ethical violation is a violation that goes to the heart of what I was just talking about, which is behavior that is not expected of government officials operating in the public interest. At a certain level, depending on statutes, depending on the element of willfulness, an ethical violation can become a criminal violation or can be a violation of the criminal laws that are shaped around those same purposes.
Okay, so what are the main ways that Trump 2.0 has organized itself to facilitate corruption? And if you want to talk here about the forms it's taken, we can do that now.
Certainly, in the first term already, there were significant concerns about whether or not Donald Trump was going to observe fundamental norms. And let me say something about the role of norms. Presidents are not subject to the same conflict of interest standards that apply to other government officials. So at this point, or over time, presidents have been expected to comply with the norms. There's a famous Office of Legal Counsel opinion by then government lawyer, later Justice Scalia, in which he says presidents are not bound by conflict of interest laws, but we certainly would hope that they would respect them and operate under them in the same way other government officials do. In the first Trump administration, it was clear that Donald Trump didn't accept that, and his blind trust was not truly a blind trust. There were many ways in which he sort of rejected some of the basic underpinnings of those norms. And now we see a significant escalation of that position, an aggressive advance of that position in Trump 2.0. The blind trust structure is even looser. The same commitments that he made about not engaging in foreign business dealings, he has declined to adopt for this second term. And so there are a variety of ways in which, and we can talk about them in detail, we see a dramatic change from Trump 1 to Trump 2, even though Trump 1 was already one that presented these issues.
Well, let's talk about the blind trust just a little bit more. This has to do with the Trump organization, and so explain how they set it up and why it's a problem. How foreign governments and maybe others are using the Trump organization to seek to influence the president, and how the president is benefiting off of his office.
Yes. Well, there are two ways in which this trust is not blind. First of all, it's run by his sons, it's not run by independent trustees. He has access to information, although in the previous administration he claimed that that access was limited to how it's being run. There were allegations he was much more involved than he claimed he would be in the operation of that family trust. And his wealth is tied up in it. And so all the business dealings that the Trump organization engages in are an avenue for private interests, including foreign interests, to enrich him and to enrich him with a view toward ingratiating themselves with the government in power.
And has this been happening?
There is every indication, uh, whatever one may say about the skew in policy that it has produced, that private interests are attempting to take advantage of this avenue for influencing the president, and that he himself is actively promoting it. Let me take the example of crypto very briefly, and then we can talk about it in any direction you'd like. If you look up the company that the Trump family has set up to involve itself in the crypto industry, it features on the front page a big picture of Donald Trump. And a Trump entity has a significant percentage interest in a company that's been established to benefit from dealings in the crypto industry. So there's just a direct tie that he's made no bones about. The president made no bones about between the family's interest in crypto, his interest in crypto, and of course, that's also an area of active government regulation and policy making.
You see, so I'm going to go to give a different example, see if it's part of the same overall scheme. How about the directives to the Justice Department, basically not to enforce anti-corruption norms, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, foreign influence laws, and the president's use of the pardon power to pardon campaign donors? Is this part of the same scheme, or is it something separate?
Yes, I mean, it is very much part of the same thing. You have a loose blind trust structure, the president openly advertising his involvement in his family business interests. And then you have policy direction within the administration that plainly will benefit those personal and family financial interests. So you've mentioned just a few. There's non-enforcement of the Federal Corrupt Practices Act, the firing of the office, the director of the Office of Government Ethics, the firing of the head of the Office of Special Counsel, which is another watchdog operation within the government. Those are just a few of the examples. I should mention in the crypto field, there is also a directive by the Deputy Attorney General to the Department of Justice to take a light hand in the criminal enforcement of rules that could constrain or impede what cryptocurrency traders and others in the crypto industry would like to do.
And the last example I'll mention is it seems like, and one hears people saying that one can basically pay a lot of money to get access to the president himself. We saw this with, I think there was a crypto meeting for the top holders of the meme coins, but more generally, it seems like the Oval Office is open for business.
Two examples come to mind. One has to do with purely personal benefit, and the other with political benefit. One is a event that is being held for those who have invested in the president's meme coins. And it involves having an opportunity to meet with the president personally and then later a tour of the White House. The other is an event that features one-on-one meetings with the president that are available for substantial multi-million-dollar contributions to his super PAC. So one has happened, one has not, but is in the offing, has been advertised, and both of them are examples of what we're talking about here.
So it just seems that we're just touching on just a few of the examples, and it seems obvious and even open that the president and his family are personally benefiting financially from the office, and that policy, you see this most clearly in the crypto context, but in others, that public policy is being influenced by the efforts to seek by the efforts to seek private gain. These seem like kind of classical forms of corruption, the kind of thing that government laws and norms are designed to prevent, and yet they're openly happening. So what do we make of this?
Well, that's the key point that you just made, which is we have certainly seen corruption in government before. There's no question, or we wouldn't have this regulatory superstructure. We've never seen a president, in the face of accepted norms, go about it so openly. He has said just recently in an interview with NBC, just at this level, and I think the issue goes beyond this, that he sees no reason why, if the economy is doing well, for example, his real estate industry shouldn't benefit the same way other industries do or other real estate concerns do. That's his view. He's expressed it openly. Now, we don't know to what extent, and this is the real problem, that these financial entanglements skew policy. That's very hard to tell. And that's the great risk of corruption.
But is it hard to tell in the crypto context? It seems like everything they're doing in the crypto context is hand in glove um, initiatives that will benefit them personally.
It certainly seems clearer in that case, but the answer that office holders will often give in those circumstances, and I suspect this would be Trump's answer, is I would do this anyway. I'm promoting this fledgling industry, this growing extraordinary industry that in effect defines our financial currency future. But at the same time, yes, I'm investing in it too. Why not?
So you said, why not? You said in the face, you said this was happening a few minutes ago. You said this is happening in the face of accepted norms. I think that's what you said.
Yes.
So my question is, are you sure they're accepted? Isn't this pretty good evidence that, I mean, let's go back. Remember the first term, we had a chapter in our book about tax disclosure and financial disclosure. He's blown through those norms. No one's even demanding that anymore. It's not even on the radar screen. And now this is happening openly. And sure, there's carping about it in the New York Times and on the op-ed pages and the like. But I mean, do we have to revise the claim that there are accepted anti-corruption norms? I mean, is that what's going on here?
I think what we do have to do is recognize that in certain circumstances, under the pressure of certain kinds of politics, the norms don't have the purchase, the bite that we once thought they did. So they have to be re-explained, refreshed, and reinvigorated. And that hasn't happened. So one of the problems with the criticisms that I hear is that it is said over and over again at ever increasing volumes that this is corrupt conduct. And the question that it's not answering is why should people care? Just invoking the anti corruption norm doesn't mean that you bought people into believing that it is so important they aren't willing to trade it off against other things that they want.
So what is the answer to that question? Why should people care? I mean, you explained earlier the connection to public policy. Is that it, or is there something more?
No, that's fundamentally it. I think the key thing is corruption is bad government. It is government that is run by officials in violation of their oath to be entirely focused on the public interest, on the laws, on the rules, in the way that they conduct their official responsibilities. That is the key. And at one level, the problem with corrupt government is that the public will never know why a particular policy decision was taken because there will always be in the background the possibility it was taken for self interest. At a more profound level, it could well be that the policy was fashioned for all the wrong reasons. It's bad policy on the merits. It was merely done to benefit the people who made the decision.
I mean, won't the reckoning come when something bad happens in a context where there's corruption? Say something terrible happens in the crypto markets, a lot of Americans lose a lot of money, and then people start focusing on, well, why are Americans losing a lot of money when the president's lining his pockets? Is that the kind of thing that needs to happen for this to get traction?
I think more likely because people lost money, for example, and some of his own supporters lost tons of money on his first meme coin announcement. He did really well, and then ultimately the market went back down again and they lost their shirts. But I think what will really matter is that if he cannot deliver on his promise to make this a really good economy, much less the greatest economy in the history of the world, and people feel the pain, then I think there'll be less tolerance for his, if you will, making money on the side and a lot of money on the side. I think that ultimately, as a political matter, is going to cause this issue to turn against him. But there's still the question of how much do people buy into this norm? And it is really important that it be, as I said, re-explained and refreshed.
And Applebaum, I think it was in a podcast this week, discussed the fact that the type of corruption and self-dealing that we're seeing now in Europe in authoritarian states led to massive public protests, people in the streets and the like. I'm just wondering whether the analogy to what happens in those states is fruitful or not fruitful for understanding the public reaction in the United States right now.
So far in this country, the analogy doesn't really hold. We don't typically have people in the streets on corruption per se. If there is an uproar, it is typically an uproar over some policy, some particular policy harm that has been connected to the corruption. I think offhand about the savings and loan crisis of the early 1990s, where members of Congress were called to account for taking contributions and relaxing their regulatory controls. And the collapses of these S&Ls had a material effect, of course, on depositors who lost a lot of money when these institutions crashed. And so the protest over corruption is, I wouldn't say secondary, but it's definitely connected to a very specified harm. It's not over corruption per se. I think another piece of this is that Americans are cynical about government, and they generally tend to believe that one party or the other, in one way or the other, is using government for its own purposes. And so there's a certain sort of background assumption that that's the way it is. And they may take a deal, as I think I mentioned earlier, a deal in which there's a little bit of graft, but the government's delivering what they want, so they're prepared to accept that exchange. Um, I should mention there is a fundamental difference that needs to be kept in mind when we talk about corruption, and that I think, given the scale of corruption in this administration, could make a difference to this answer, could mean that things will be different this time around than in the past. And that is, right now, uh, scale does matter. It's very open, it's very notorious. To some extent, that's working in Trump's favor because he's doing everything so openly. There's no scandal to be uncovered, really, even though the press reports on this in detail. He provides them with a lot of their own reporting material. But in the United States, typically, and this goes back to something like the SNL and other notable scandals, there is a difference between a collusion, if you will, between the government and industry, in which the government is promoting policies beneficial to a particular industry or collection of business people that also benefits government officials personally. There's a difference between that and the straight out bribe for policy. The difference between creating an environment in which everybody benefits, but the public interest is secondary as a consideration. The government benefits, the private interest benefit, but the public doesn't so much benefit. And a case which I think the public doesn't tolerate, where it turns out that cash changed hands to influence policy. Somebody put money or campaign contributions to the benefit of an office holder in return for a very specific action on policy. And that's a critical difference. Um, I do want to make one last comment, if I can, without overextending the answer. In addition to this cynicism in government, I think we also have to take into account that the public has also heard over time a lot of criticism of the existing regulatory regime, the one that Trump is, by the way, taking down, and the norms of which he is, violating at every turn. There have been claims that it really didn't amount to very much. At best, it caught minor instances of conflict of interest. At worst, government conduct was overregulated to no particular point. The requirements for conducting or for entering government service, the obligations that you took on, financial reporting and other obligations were so onerous. It drove people out of government, or it caused people not to take government positions. And so, if we do have a period of really reflecting on this experience and hopefully refreshing government public appreciation of ethical government and rehabilitating the norm and potentially refreshing the laws, I would hope that the failures of the prior regime would be taken into account, because that is also, I think, undercut respect for the ethical superstructure that we had for many years.
And what about the idea that you alluded to earlier that I think the Trump people either believe or are pushing, and namely, there's no problem here. It's fine for us to pursue our private interests as long as the country is doing well. I mean, that's really what's on offer here. That's the alternative vision that's being offered here. Is that correct? And what do you think about that?
They do make that argument. They in effect say, what difference does it make? So we're doing well, but we're also making life better for you. First of all, there may be a question of whether they're making life better for people. And then secondly, more critically, there may be the problem that one of the reasons they're not making life better for people is they're not focused on their interests, they're focused on their own. And that is the fundamental problem in corruption, that they're running the government for themselves and not for everybody else. The public has to be convinced of that, and has to be convinced as a general matter that that is the threat that corruption presents.
So, do we ever go back to where we were either January 19th, 2025, or maybe January 19th, 2017, when the first Trump administration really started breaking these norms? I mean, is the cat out of the bag now? Does there have to be a dramatic rethink? Well, I mean, maybe it's too early to tell because we don't know how this is going to play out. But it just seems astonishing that there's so much open self-aggrandizement by top officials, personal self-aggrandizement, even if the public policy is sound. It just seems extraordinary that it's being basically accepted, and I'm just wondering whether this can be reversed.
Leadership can help reverse it. Leadership that brings people to a recognition of what a big problem this is for government, and who embody sort of principles of integrity that people respond to. I think that could clearly make a big difference. I do think it's going to take a while to repair this, but maybe there's an opportunity here. Maybe a reform program will enable us to focus on what's really important in the reform regulatory regime and buy people in to, some key reforms. One example, by the way, given your recent writing about the importance of constitutional reform right now in this debate over presidential power, the emoluments clause that seems to provide generally, people have assumed for a long time, that it required congressional consent for the President of the United States to accept gifts or benefits of any kind from foreign states. But there's a question about whether the emolument clause actually applies to the president. And this administration has taken the position, a very narrow position, on how it would apply, even if it did apply to the president. I think constitutional reform would require, since we can't count on Congress to take a robust view, a reform of that constitutional provision to bring the president clearly within its scope and to strengthen its application. Because most Americans would agree we don't want foreign governments to be padding the payrolls of American presidents.
They would agree, but, and of course I agree, it just seems like we are galaxies away from this happening, given you talked about political leadership. The Republicans in Congress are silent on this issue, which is in itself slightly astonishing. The White House is not making a big deal out of this. This is not something that courts can really touch right now. The Justice Department, as you say, is facilitating this through non-enforcement and the like. It seems we're a very long way from any reform program, statutory norm based or constitutional, but maybe we need to be thinking about it now so when the time comes, it can be implemented.
Well, as you know, I'm forever the optimist. And so I would say this. First of all, there are even members of Congress on the Republican side who, particularly with his crypto dealings, are starting to become uneasy.
Right.
And it's beginning to present problems for the bill that the administration wants to move on crypto regulation. Uh, so I think that is some indication that there are limits to what people are prepared to accept. I also think, as the last point I'm going to make, a reform program may kick in slowly, may require a lot of debate. There'll be reversals, and it may seem very distant, but we're fighting not just for this generation, but also for the next.
All right. That's a good place to stop. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.